Hello everyone, welcome back and welcome if you're new here. Today we are going to be recreating a Monet oil painting in watercolour. So specifically this painting, which is called Impression Sunrise, and it's just stunning, so let's give it a go. First of all, we're going to tape off the frame using masking tape, and I'm just making it a little bit narrower than the actual sketchbook page. The next step is to draw in the basic shapes. So as you can see from the original painting, it is a very loose painting. I would suggest not going too detailed with the drawing, just because you want to be able to be a bit freer with your brush strokes once you actually start painting. The main things I'm blocking in are just those smokestacks in the background and then the two boats in the foreground. The next step is to apply masking fluid. If you don't have masking fluid, don't panic. I can actually give you a suggestion at the end of something else to do, but I just masked out the sun and also the reflection of the sun in the water. The next step is to mix a warm and a cool wash. So for my warm wash, I'm using yellow ochre, and I accidentally put a bit too much in there. And then adding a bit of Pyrrole orange, which is a very, very vibrant orange. So I'm just adding a little bit of that to the mix. Then I clean my brush off just so that I don't muddy up the two different washes. Then the cool wash is cobalt blue and a little bit of lavender, which is my favourite colour at the moment. I recently bought this one and I just love it. So we're going to do a wet and wet wash, and that just means covering the entire page in water. You don't want it to be sopping wet, but you want it to be nicely saturated, and then dropping in those washes that we've just made. So I'm going to first of all do the warm wash towards the top of the page to simulate the warm setting sun, or actually I think it's sunrise, so it would be the warm rising sun. And then adding the cool wash underneath that and just letting it do its thing. The great thing about watercolour is it just almost paints itself at this stage. So I'm just letting it do its thing and soaking down the page, and I always love doing the first wash. It's just a lot of fun. I'm also varying my colour as I go down, just so that it's not purely cobalt blue, just so it's not too boring. You always want to be changing up your colour as much as you can, just so that your washes don't get boring. Just to mix the colours up even a little bit more, I'm adding some cobalt turquoise light, that's really hard to say, towards the bottom, and that's just adding a little bit more interest. Then I'm also going to put some of that reflection of the warm colour into the water itself, just to add that real effect of reflections. You don't have to match it exactly, so don't feel like you have to use the exact same colours that I'm using. Next we're going to drop in some stronger blues, and this is basically just getting more paint on your brush, less water and more paint, and dropping it in while the wash is still wet, and it just creates those beautiful soft edges that is just so unique to watercolour, and I just love how this looks. And I'm also just dropping in a little bit more warm towards the bottom, just to vary it up a bit. So once the first wash has dried completely, we'll go into the second wash. I'm using more cobalt blue. I find cobalt really hard to say. We're using more cobalt blue to do some details. I'm using a smaller brush here because we just want to get a little bit more detailed. I'm using the Black Velvet brush from Silver Brush, which is my favourite at the moment. It's just so great for doing details. And I'm going to be going in and doing these smokestacks and things, but I just want to make sure that it is blended enough, because there really aren't many harsh lines in this area. So here I'm going in, I'm putting in the colour, and then I'm cleaning out the brush so that it has just got water on the brush, and then blending it so that it creates a softer line. As you can see there, that's some water on the brush, and I'm just using it to blend out the smokestacks, just to give it that atmospheric smoky feeling. and I'll speed this up a little bit because I'm basically just copying the original image and going in and drawing in the lines and then blending them out. By the way, if you like this video, it would really help me out if you could hit the subscribe button, and also leave in the comments if you want me to do another one of these videos. If you have any of your favourite paintings that you would like me to recreate in watercolour, let me know in the comments. So now I'm going into the reflections. So with reflections, it's almost just the same thing as painting the actual objects themselves, but you want to do this left to right motion with your brush a little bit more. So as you can see in the reference image, there's a lot of these horizontal lines that go across, and that really just gives the impression of reflections. Again, I'm just adding a bit of lavender into this wash as well, just to mix it up a bit, just so it's not completely pure cobalt blue, and just mixing it up a little bit. And then I noticed Monet does lots of these little lines. It's almost like a childish way to draw reflections. It's definitely not completely realistic, but I think it's a really interesting way to simplify the shapes of the reflections. It's literally just some short lines in the water, so it's pretty easy to recreate. And then on the image that I have, it started to look like it went a bit green. So I tried to create a green from the colours that I've already used. And that is a good way to create colour harmony, is by trying to mix colours out of colours that you have already put into the painting, rather than just adding a completely new colour. So here I'm using a mix of cobalt turquoise light and yellow ochre to make my green. And then I'm just going in and darkening some of this area, and you'll see the masking fluid just repels the paint completely. And this whole area is quite important because it's kind of the reflection around the reflection of the sun. So I just paid careful attention here to check the reference and make sure that everything was looking good. And then I blended some of that out just so it wasn't completely uniform and looked a little bit more natural. Next I'm going in and dropping in some more warm, because I want to reflect the sky. I really want it to look like the water is reflecting the sky. So to do that, you just want to make sure that all of the colours that are in the sky are also in the water being reflected. So now I'm doing the boats. For some reason this wasn't in focus, so sorry about that. But you can kind of just see that I'm just copying the shapes that Monet created. They're very simple shapes. It's literally just a rectangle with two blobs sticking out the top. I try not to think of these as people or boats. I just think of what the shapes are and just try and copy that. I find that if you think too hard about what you're actually trying to paint, then you'll end up painting a representation of that thing rather than just the shape you actually see in front of you. And then I'm bringing this wash down into the reflection as well, and then just adding more of those horizontal lines to be the reflection of the boat and the people in the water. Now we get on to the fun stage, which is peeling off the masking fluid, which is always my favourite part. It's really satisfying. If you've been struggling with masking fluid ripping your paper, then I would suggest two things. Firstly, make sure that the paper is completely dry, leave it for as long as you can, and then also make sure that the paper is good enough quality to be handling the masking fluid. Here I'm using 100% cotton paper, so that really helps with making sure that the paper doesn't rip. I have had a few issues in the past with certain sketchbooks and masking fluid, so just be careful at this point and take it slow. The reason I'm using masking fluid is because it's easier to get a really bright colour if you just have white underneath, because there's no other colours underneath muddying what you're putting on top. And then when I get down to the reflections, I'm able to leave a little bit of the white showing through, so it just adds that nice sparkly effect on the water, which just looks really nice. So that is why I use the masking fluid. If you don't happen to have masking fluid, you can just achieve the same effect with gouache or even acrylic. Just any opaque medium, feel free to use that here. And gouache technically is a type of watercolour, so it's not cheating if you use a bit of gouache at this point. And I actually did go in with some white gouache just to make that sparkling effect even brighter, and I felt like adding a bit of white gouache into the sun actually made the whole thing look a bit brighter and more shiny. So yeah, don't be afraid to use a bit of opaque medium even in a challenge like this where you're doing a challenge to just use watercolour. I also added a bit of white gouache into the sky just to give the effect of clouds, and then I just smudged it out with my finger, and I think that just added a really nice final touch and added a bit more of that atmosphere into the sky. And this is my favourite part, peeling off the tape. So satisfying. And here is the final result. This was really fun. Let me know in the comments if you have any of your own famous oil paintings that you would like me to recreate in watercolour. It's definitely a fun challenge to see what we can achieve with the medium of watercolour, and I will see you in the next video.